Hi students, today we're going to be looking at page 16 and I want you to open up to number 7, Mix It Up. And you're going to notice that underneath each note there are lines. We're going to be writing in the counting. We're not going to be writing in the note names. We're going to be writing in the counting and learning on how to count eighth notes. You'll see up on the screen I have the same song, but I don't have lines underneath my notes. So instead of writing lines, I just want you to kind of just notice where my lines would be. And I'm going to draw in between my violin and my viola line. But if you play cello or bass, you also count the same exact way. What I want you guys to do is go through every measure. And again, we have a measure right here. Here's a line letting me know that's a measure. Here's another measure. I can tell because there's a line right here dividing that little section. And we have a lot of different measures. And I'm not going to go through and draw every measure because you can see them. But we should know every measure begins with the number 1. So in between my violin and viola line, I'm going to draw number 1. But again, I want you to make sure you draw a number 1 underneath your note. So I'll draw it underneath all of the notes, but I'm just going to make sure, I'm just not going to be writing it on every single measure. So what I want you guys to do right now is, again, I'm going to draw in between the violin and viola line. I want you to go to every measure and I want you to put the number 1 in the first note that you see. So I'll go ahead and do that too. Give you a couple more seconds to finish writing your ones. And again, cello and bass and viola, you're writing it underneath your notes, just like I did on my first measure. So I'm going to move on. You can notice underneath my first 1 that you wrote, I wrote a 1. I'm never going to have a number 1 in any measure on this whole entire song again. So if I had like a little number board up here, I have a 1, 2, 3, and a 4. I'm never going to be using this number 1 again. The number 1 is done. I'm going to cross that one out. So if I go through and have another number 1, I'm going to know that that's going to be incorrect because I can never have another number 1 on Mix It Up again. When I get to my next one, Baba Black Sheep, I'm going to have another number 1. But on Mix It Up, I'm not going to ever have another number 1. Here's an important thing to know. All of the first beat right here that I'm circling, every one of these notes is called a quarter note. And you can tell it's a quarter note because there's no line above or below your note. This is called a beam. The line that is below the note or the line that is above the note. Right here going across to another note, that lets me know that I have an eighth note. So can you see any eighth notes on Mix It Up? Yeah, I see a couple eighth notes too, huh? So we say eighth note right here. I can see that beam. Beam is an important word to know. There's my beam, and I'll circle all of them. I want you to notice that sometimes the beams go above the note, and sometimes the beams go below the note. And if they're connecting from one note to the next, that lets me know that that's an eighth note if I see one line above or below the notes. That's going to be a different way of counting. Since I don't see a beam connecting from my beat 1, and you can tell it's beat 1 because we already wrote that down, right? So here's my number 1. I don't see another beam connecting to this note. I know that I can actually move on to my next number. So after 1 is number 2. I'm going to go ahead and write another number 2 right here. And again, if you're viola, cello, or bass, you're going to write it underneath your first note of the beam. And when I see that beam, now I'm going to have something new that's called an and. And what that means is it's just still part of my second beat. When we're doing eighth notes, when you see that beam above or below the note, eighth notes go twice as fast as my quarter note. So when I'm playing this, I'm going to use my whole bow on beat 1 because I don't see a beam connecting to those notes. But when I go to beat 2, which is again that first note of that eighth note, something you'll notice in 6th grade music is that when you have a beam, the number is always going to be on the first note of the beat. And that lets me know that I'm going to only use half bow because they go twice as fast. So on the quarter notes, I'm using whole bow. On the eighth notes, I'm using half bow. So I've finished this second beat. I have the 2 and I'm writing it as a plus. That to me is easier. I'm not going to be adding it, but the plus means and. Then I'm going to go to my next beat, 3. Since I don't see a beam, see if you can figure out what the next number is going to be. That's exactly right. So the next number is going to be a 4. The only way that this next number could be an and would be if I had a connecting beam, a note connecting to that quarter note, which again now would be a 8th note. Then I could have an and underneath the note. But because I just added that and that wasn't there in the first place, I know I'm going to move on to my next number, 4 and. And there's my beam letting me know that there's an and. So go ahead and write that down. I know some of you are like, I think I can figure out the rest of it. So hold on tight. I want you to notice that in part A, the second measure is exactly the same counting. So what you guys wrote down for part A right here, I want you to copy to the same thing onto the second measure of part A. So you're still writing, and I'll write it down this time, but I'm not going to write it down for the rest of the song. I want you to write down 1, 2, and same thing that you just wrote, 3, 4, and. Great. Let's do B together. Oh, hey, I see something different. My 1 is already there, so I already know my 1 is done. I'm going to move on to my next number, but I actually can't move on to my next number yet because I have this. Do you remember what this is called again? That's exactly right. That is called a beam. I'm going to move on, and I see that I have a beam, so I know I cannot move to my next number yet, because if I move to my next number, that would be a 2, then a 3, then a 4, and then I can only have 4 numbers, like I mentioned earlier right here. I would already be done with this measure, but I see 2 more notes right here, so that couldn't be correct. Since I see a beam, hopefully you noticed, I'm going to have an and written there. Now I see a quarter note, I see a 3 right there. I don't see a beam connecting to those notes, so I'm going to move on to my next number, 4. Ooh, I see a beam, and. Oh, I just realized I made a mistake. Ooh, I hope you noticed that, huh? I put a 3 instead of a 2. So this note needs to be a 2, then 3, then and, then 4. Whoops, even teachers make mistakes sometimes, huh? Maybe you noticed that already. Okay, so go ahead and fill that in for the next measure. Again, I'm just going to draw an arrow. So I'm not going to write in the counting, but I want you to actually write in the counting. We're going to move on to section C. Section C looks a little bit different because we have a beam going over top of 4 notes. I'm still going to count it the same way. If I see a beam, I know I can't move to my next number because we know, again, if I wrote a 2, 3, 4, those are the only numbers I can have, and I still have 4 more notes in that measure. So that can't be correct. I'm going to put an and I'm going to put the next number 2. Then and, because I see a beam, my next number 3, I see a beam, and 4, and. Great. I hope that some of you are already figuring this out and starting to move ahead of me and see if you're correct. So again, I'm not going to write this in. I'm just going to draw an arrow. I want you to write the counting in right here. And let's go to part D. Ooh, did you already figure that there's no beam connecting this note right here? Now there is, but there wasn't before. So I can move to my next number. My next number is going to be 2. And I see a beam, and 3, and 4, and. Go ahead and copy that down and go to the very end. I'll give you a couple seconds to do this. All right. So if you aren't done writing this down, go ahead and pause the video for now, finish filling it out, and I'm going to go ahead and move on, and I'm going to be playing Mix It Up. And like I mentioned earlier, when I see a quarter note at the very, very beginning of the whole song, I'm going to use my whole bow. So anytime I see a note with a quarter note with no beam connected to it, I'm going to use my whole bow. If I see 8th notes, I know I'm going to only use half of my bow because they go faster. Here's part A. I'm going to play it first, and I want you to echo me. And I'm going to play both measures. They're exactly the same of part A. I'll go first. 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and. So did you notice how I counted when I played? That's helpful to me because that lets me know how much bow I need to use, and it lets me know that I know how to count it. So go ahead and play that with me. I want you to try to count out loud too. Looking at Mix It Up, part A. 1, 2, and ready, play. 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and. Let's go to part B. I'm going to play it first. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Play it with me. Ready? Play. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Good. Let's move on to part C, where everything has a beam above or below the note. So there's going to be no whole bow on part C. I'm going to play it first. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Go ahead and play it with me. Ready? Go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Good. Go ahead and move on to part D. Notice we have a quarter note first. So how much bow are we going to use? That's right. We're going to use our whole bow. I'm going to go first. 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and. Go ahead and play that with me. Ready? Go. 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and. Nicely done, you guys. If you didn't play it exactly right, go ahead and rewind the video back and play it through again. Hopefully you feel a little bit more confident with your eighth notes. And if you have any other questions, you can ask your teacher. Bye, guys.